Today, right just before this interview, President Joe Biden addressed the nation on the vaccination program and the progress. I bring this up because right now we're seeing two different kind of Americans. One that are vaccinated and the other one that are not vaccinated or choosing to just not be vaccinated at all.
Yeah.
How are you looking at this politically? What did you think of his address? And do you think it will help vaccinate those people?
Yeah, I'm not so sure it has much of a political drama behind it. Perhaps it did initially, but right now I think it's a matter of convincing people to go get vaccinated, especially with the new Delta variant that's circulating around the globe. I think just about every country now is experiencing some form of the other of the Delta variant, which is much more transmissible, far more infectious, causes much more devastation, and actually does not have any of the symptoms or doesn't have many of the symptoms of the earlier virus, the original one which came out of Wuhan. I think what we're seeing here is, well, first of all, President Biden had set a goal of vaccinating 70% of Americans by July 4th.
Right.
That didn't happen. We hit around 50% of the population. And what's happening is you've got pockets in various states where people simply don't want to take the vaccine, are afraid of the vaccine, are uncertain about it for many reasons. Maybe they think they don't trust science as much as one should. They don't trust the government, and that type of situation you're dealing with. Many of those who are not being vaccinated also are the younger population, folks who are, let's say, in their 18s and 20s and that type of age group, up to even the 30s. They don't wish to get vaccinated at all, thinking they're invincible and can weather the storm. So you've got some states where vaccines were not available that easily, and where there's a greater segment of the population that has been hesitant or resistant to getting vaccinated.
Right.
Those states are seeing more infections right now. The states where you've had people, a large number of their populations vaccinated, are seeing less infections, or almost down to 10% or zero infections as of the date we're speaking right now. So there's a dichotomy here, and President Biden went on the air to appeal to everybody who's hesitant to say, please get vaccinated, and we're going out there to make it easier for you. You can walk into a pharmacy, and you don't need an appointment, just walk in, ask for the vaccine, you'll get it. The government plans to circulate vaccine centers at festival sites, beaches, anywhere people go for the summer, or to go in groups and make sure it's available there.
Right.
And he's also promised to be working on getting vaccines to everyone's own physicians as quickly as possible, because the theory is when you go to your doctor, you would trust your own doctor the most before anyone else, say a pharmacist or an outside camp where they administer vaccines, etc.
Right.
So his appeal was to touch the chord and to touch the nerves of those who are still hesitant, still don't want it, with the urgency that if we don't get the vaccine, what's going to happen is the segment of the population, which is still significant, 50% or maybe 40%, will get COVID, and the new variant, which is far more dangerous,
Right.
will then somehow find a way into those who are vaccinated, and that's the problem.
Right, but a quick follow-up here, Mr. Vyas. When you're looking at this whole situation, there is a very obvious partisan divide about how to actually take hold of vaccinations and what the opinions should be. Don't you think politicians, especially in red states, have responsibility to make sure that they convey that message and more are vaccinated?
Correct. No question about it. I was just saying that the latest trend that we are seeing is more hesitancy.
Right.
But you're right. During the past administration, red states were the ones that didn't want to emphasize getting vaccinated as a necessity. They wanted to say people are free to do what they want. Therefore, they opened up sooner than other states. Examples: Florida and Texas, Georgia. So I mean, the thing is that they just made it seem right then that maybe the vaccines are not that effective, and therefore we're not going to enforce it. And yes, there is a role that politics does play as far as that initial response and treatment of this disease or this variant is concerned. At this stage, though, it's more a matter of convincing people, because those who've taken it have told their fellow Americans, look, I feel great, I feel safe because I've taken the vaccine. Maybe you should do it. There's a lot of public pressure on fellow Americans now, I think, to go ahead and get the vaccine, because the people who've gotten vaccinated are also worried that if those who are unvaccinated develop the Delta variant, then we're all at risk.
Yeah, it's quite a situation here in the nation. Let's hope more can get vaccinated. That's the really important thing. Another big news that came today, or has been coming for a while now, is the issue of ransomware attacks that have been happening on many businesses across the nation. Now, they're being linked to a gang in Eastern Europe or Russia. So again, we hear about Russia interfering and causing these ransomware attacks. Why is this happening? Why does this continue to happen?
Yeah, this was a big ransomware attack and a very, very lethal one, if I may say. I mean,
Right.
it's disabled, what did they say, about 1 million, at least they claim, the ransomware attackers claim they've disabled 1 million units and pieces of equipment, which means computers, could be cell phones, mobile phones, et cetera, et cetera. And they struck a nerve here because they hit one of the big companies that deals with several other companies around the globe that administer your internet service, okay, that administer your service.
Right.
So you've actually got thousands of businesses that have been affected by this ransomware attack. Now what they've confirmed today is it did emanate from a criminal syndicate in Russia, not necessarily the Russian state. What President Joe Biden had done 3 weeks ago when he met with Vladimir Putin was to ask him to take firm action against anyone that indulges in ransomware emanating from Russian soil. And what we got was sort of a lukewarm response, but one that perhaps was reasonable as well in these type of negotiations, that, okay, maybe we'll do that. I think now the pressure is going to be on Joe Biden again to make this a very, very firm pushback against Russia, telling them, look, you guys are responsible for this, or at least handling this. Please do so immediately. The pressure is on President Joe Biden. This was a serious attack. This should wake up the entire world to the world of cyberspace. This should also alert everybody, you and me included, to be very, very careful what we put online about ourselves, any personal information, etc., etc. This is proof right here that things could be compromised, and your own, privacy could be compromised in a very, very meaningful way, in a very dangerous way. In fact, I think cybercrime is worse in many ways than all types of other crimes at the rate it's going right now. This is what, the third or fourth major international attack,
Right.
and this is something very serious.
Yes, and it continues to be an issue. I really hope they can find what to do with this. Another big issue that has come into attention, and again continues to be in attention, is gun violence. So here are the numbers. I have 150 killed in 400 shootings on 4th of July, the weekend that just passed. I have seen another information that said New York has spiked 40% in its crime since 2020. We're seeing it across major cities in the country, such as Chicago, such as Texas, and other places. What needs to be done in this situation, and who is responsible as a responsible party in this situation?
This is the result of a pressure cooker explosion from people being cooped up during the pandemic. It boils down mainly, first, I think, and I believe, to the mental stability of people. This pandemic has taken a huge toll, especially in an America where we do have the Second Amendment, where everyone who's sane of mind, or supposedly sane of mind, has a right to own a weapon. In some states, you don't even need to prove anything about your mental capacity or, stability, etc., etc. But first of all, it's a major mental issue for a lot of people, and I think we're going to have to step up social services first to begin to assess who needs assistance with their depression, or whatever it is involving their mental faculties, their capabilities, their psychological state of mind, which means bringing in a whole bunch of people, such as psychiatrists, psychologists, perhaps giving them government help to go out there into the field to identify who might be a victim of mental illness. Then comes the question of weapons and guns. How do you get them out of the hands of people? Now, those who have acquired them legally, there's no way you're going to do that. That's why I talked about the mental situation first, where we're going to have to deal with this crisis. Cities like, again, also another factor is this whole movement that came in the last couple of years to defund the police, etc., has demoralized the police forces around the country. In Republican and Democratic states, police are afraid in many states now to go out there and confront anyone. I know some towns in the state of New Jersey and in New York State both are not giving priority to controlling speeders on the highways, for instance. And the reason for that is they don't want, now these are my sources telling me this in law enforcement. The reason they don't want to do it, they don't want to confront someone who might turn violent, and then police in turn have to use some form of or method of violence to suppress any attack from the would-be perpetrator. All right? And so they've decided, and this is unofficial, they've decided we're not going to be taking action and going for speeders, for instance. I'm giving you one example. And they don't want to touch it. New York City is another story. New York City has always had a number of people who have roamed around on the subways, on the streets of the city at all hours, who needed mental help immediately. They needed psychiatric help. And that's a decades-old problem. I've seen that in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and going on to now, to today. But it's the demoralization I see here of the police forces. If they get the resources, if they get the support of the public, and that's why I refer back to my suggestion that there be community interactions now with the police department, there be community committees that are formed, and the council, the police themselves, said work with the police to go out there and identify who's doing what. I gave you in the last conversation, we had the example of Camden in New Jersey, which was an extremely violent city, which is now one of the most peaceful cities. And that's because the police department was altogether revamped. First of all, dismissed, the entire force was gone. There was a brand new force built from scratch. And their program is to be part of the community, to let the people know that we in blue are yours. We're not somebody else's. And miracle of miracles, no gun violence in the city that was known as the most violent in the nation. So there's going to be a lot of work needed, but most of all, there's going to be a lot of social service work needed to deal with the mental impact of the pandemic.
What kind of a background check do you think this requires?
It requires the most intense background check. Weapons going into the hands of citizens require a tremendous background check. We have to be able to prove, citizens should be able to prove. And first of all, citizens have the right to own arms. That's in the Constitution, all right? So unless something happens in Congress where they say, no, we're going to change the Constitution, etc., in the wake of the Constitution as it is, citizens have the right to bear arms. Given that, states can implement rules where there should be background checks. I think there should be background checks to assess the stability of someone, make a check and see that they're, in other words, vet them to see they are capable of owning weapons and are responsible citizens who can own weapons for whatever purpose, for sport, for game, or for whatever. All right. So yes, background checks extremely critical.
It's very interesting. I was interviewing an army person once, and he said that they are trained to use the weapon. They know exactly when to use it, when not to use it. Now, how do you train the rest of the country in that? That would be interesting. Another big issue that I'd like to discuss with you is the January 6th Commission that's being worked at. What insight do you have into this? What do we need to know? And it seems like they keep on having conversations, but there are no results.
Yeah, well, this is where it's still in the early stages. It's a committee that's been set up by Congress, and they're working on finding out the truth of whether this was organized, which is the widespread belief that this was organized at a very high level. Also involved some police officers, some former army officers, and things like that from video that they've gathered, the proof that they seem to have gathered. So they want to know if this was a much more organized event than it seemed to be. Like, when it first appeared, when we first all saw it, it looked like it was just crowds that were being, rallied, spontaneously to go out there and to assert what they felt was the right thing to do, which was storm the Capitol. But now, increasingly, video evidence, vocal evidence, court evidence now, people who are being convicted or at least charged are coming forward, and you're getting evidence from there on that this may have been a widely planned, a very well-planned conspiracy, actually, against the very seat of democracy here in our country. And so this is the very early stages, but I expect a lot more to come out. However, you're going to have the detractors here too, who will say, well, this wasn't a unanimous decision of the Senate or Congress to do something and to investigate this within the precincts of Congress, have people come and testify there, et cetera, et cetera. This is a committee that's been appointed. So we just dismiss it as nothing to take seriously. What we're going to have to look at is whatever they come up with, whether that information can then be used in court to start to prosecute everyone. There is already the individual law enforcement aspect of this, where they're going after people. The FBI, for instance, has been studying diligently for months each video frame, each photograph that they find, and they're getting help from the public to identify these people, and they've made great inroads so far. This is going to take a while. I don't expect answers very soon. I think it would take about a year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll get some answers or at least some leads within a couple of months. But this is going to take a while. This is going to take meticulous look, unless there are whistleblowers within the rioters who come out and say it really wasn't worth it. And at that point, you'll get a lot more information a lot more quickly.
You know, many say that the threat still remains on the capital or other capitals across the country. Do you agree with that?
Yes, of course it does. It is. The threats continue. Intelligence officials have warned the public, they've warned legislators to be very careful that the threats are out there. They tap into all the chatter. Our intelligence is very, very good, probably the best in the world. We do tap into all the chatter that's going on Twitter, on the dark web, on the web itself, on mobile phones, etc. When they have to, they're able to figure out if there is somebody using code language that would signal an attempt to do something that would be basically, against the Constitution and against this country. And so I think I have a lot of confidence in the intelligence that is working out there to figure out in advance before something happens. But we have to be alert. You never know. There can be that lone wolf that goes out there, does something. We've had a couple of those already since January 6th. A couple of lone wolf type people go in there, try to breach the barricades outside the Capitol. They've been stopped, thankfully. But this will have to be observed very, very carefully. The threat certainly will not go away.
Two more questions left here for you, Mr. Vyas. The first question I'd like to ask would be on Afghanistan. We keep on hearing a lot of talks on the troops being pulled back, brought here. This has been one of the biggest projects of President Joe Biden as well. How are you looking at it? And when we pull these troops out, what will happen to the region? What will happen to countries around it? How will that be affected?
Yeah, this is actually the most dangerous situation in the history of that part of the world as I see it right now. There were peace talks that were held. There was supposed to be an agreement, behind the scenes agreement with the Taliban to not carry out any bloodshed, etc., in the country once U.S. troops and other foreign troops leave. Now, the moment the U.S. forces have left Bagram Air Base and have left many parts of the northern part of Afghanistan, and actually they're almost all gone now, the U.S. troops, except for those that are going to be protecting the perimeter of the interior of the United States Embassy in Kabul itself. This situation, and you've already seen now the Taliban advancing, seeming absolutely unstoppable. They're out there. You got troops, the Afghan troops who have been trained by the Western forces, well trained, with good arms, retreating and then fleeing. Right now, they're overwhelming the border at Tajikistan. There's also fears they're going to go running away into Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and all the rest of it. And those countries are now in urgent negotiations with one another to figure out what to do at the border and how to set up camps to meet these refugees. I've also noticed the video coming in from Afghanistan, whatever is available right now, that a lot of the women are suddenly donning burqas and all the rest of it, head to toe. Another sign that we're going back to the dark ages of medieval rule, basically, and it's going to be a terrible situation. Countries that will have to watch their own borders at that time will be Pakistan, will be India. Certainly, India doesn't want to be drawn into being a part of anything to do with that country at this time. With Afghanistan, India's dealing with a lot of issues internally itself right now, also dealing with the rest of the world. But that's something that I think. But India, being the major democratic nation in the area, would at some point have to step in to help. But I hope it doesn't drag them into something major. But I'd still say the immediate danger would be to a country like Pakistan, which would have to start to watch what happens at its borders and to make sure the Taliban don't infiltrate. They already have elements of the Taliban in Pakistan. they'd have to be careful that the Afghan Taliban don't just come in and absolutely overrun their territory as well. So the implications are enormous. And from there, the implications are enormous for the rest of the world because anything happening in that part of the world is certainly going to affect the rest of the world as well.
Right. Let me ask you, do you see the US troops going back in a couple of months if situation goes completely out of hand?
Well, that's a commitment made by the president. That's a commitment made previously by President Donald Trump, who also wanted to pull out the troops, though we've had enough of a war, 20 years of war over there. And his goal was September 11th. Biden's goal was September 11th. I think it's going to happen before that. There won't be any troops, except, as I mentioned, perhaps about 500 to 600 troops that'll take care of the U.S. embassy and U.S. interests over there. My fear is we could see a Saigon-like situation, Saigon, Vietnam at the time, during the Vietnam War, where all of a sudden you're going to have to evacuate the U.S. embassy because the Taliban, I believe, cannot be trusted. So if there have been backroom negotiations already, the Afghan government is trying to continue those negotiations with the Taliban, but there's a standoff, there's a standstill to those negotiations. They've stopped, all right? And so my fear is that eventually the U.S. embassy, which is heavily fortified, it's like a fortress by itself, and those troops, we're going to see a situation like Saigon, where helicopters are going to have to come in and rescue the embassy staff and evacuate everyone, including the troops themselves, and leave the country. If that happens, we're going to see Afghanistan fall into chaos and be overrun completely by the Taliban, who will have a field day doing and saying whatever they feel like and taking everyone back to the medieval times.
Right. What a situation. Let's hope something good comes out of it.
Yeah.
My last question to you actually would be, I would like your comments on what is going on in Florida right now in Surfside. The Condo Collapse, it's been a tragic news. About 113 are still unaccounted, 32 are dead as of today. How should we look at this? And let me ask you, do you think now the politicians will take a step to make sure this doesn't happen again? Who does the responsibility fall on? And how are you evaluating this whole situation?
Yeah, it's going to be a responsibility of the government there right now. The entire state's, the governor's office is going to have to take responsibility immediately. The local officials in Miami-Dade County, the officials in the area where it happened, Surf City, etc., they're going to have to assess all those buildings in the entire state of Florida, in my opinion, that are built along the coast. Because it seems now from this, it seems like they were all built in such a hurry without any thinking about the future, especially along coastal areas, so close to the beaches, etc., where erosion and water are huge factors, huge factors. And I think we've got enough structural engineers who've come out there, former structural engineers, former architects who have come out and have all expressed their views on various media, who have been talking about a reassessment of many buildings. I believe in the Miami-Dade area, they're going to reassess at least 500 major structures, major tall buildings like the one that collapsed. And incidentally, they had to set off an explosion to, get rid of the second part of that same building, the Champlain Towers, the second portion of the towers before it, came down by itself and hurt any of the first responders. So that means that there are questions of instability within these structures. It would need to go down to the drawing board, in my opinion. There are going to have to be some new modern engineers who will have to look at what's going on in these areas. And if necessary, now this is my own thinking, I'm not an architect or engineer, but it's just common sense. If necessary, if there are such defects in other buildings along the coastline, whether they can be fixed so that there's no danger to those who are resident within those buildings. If not, they will have to be evacuated. And many of those structures then would have to, this is a far-reaching conclusion of mine, but they would have to be basically brought down. And many of them would have to be relocated. Those buildings would have to be relocated, rebuilt, et cetera, et cetera. This is a real problem, a serious problem.
Yes,
Don't forget, Florida also has a big problem in sinkholes. So this is not just along the coast, but within Florida itself and many interior parts of the state for years and years and years. You've had sinkholes swallow up homes, just regular ranch homes, regular two-story homes, regular, anything, smaller homes that have been swallowed up in the middle of a block, or a whole block has disappeared inside. So I think the very foundations of several parts of Florida will have to be examined by competent engineers and architects to determine if there is a real danger to many, many more thousands of people.
What's your message for the families?
Message to the families: we're all praying for you. Every single one of us is praying for you.
Yes.
We all feel for you, for everybody, no question about it. This is a terrible tragedy of monumental proportions. It could affect anyone. There was so many elderly, so many young people, so many children, and we're all just right alongside them, mourning, hoping for the best, still hoping that somehow we find more survivors. This is a terrible, terrible tragedy. And I think I would personally say we love you. Everybody loves all of the people who are going through this, and we want to give them our most ardent support